And welcome back. We are going to continue looking at some examples. Last time we had looked at some nice examples here with if-else statements. So let's go ahead and kind of code this from scratch, this time without having to kind of reference some of our previous material. So we, of course, here are using our variables that we kind of started with last time. I have statically assigned some variables here. I also have some variables set up where I can use them for user input. And maybe I can also go ahead and let's go ahead and add in a string variable here. So let's just go ahead and call this string input. And I'm going to initialize this just to be, let's just say, an empty string right now. So now that this is set up, let's go ahead and use some if statements here. Let's test for some conditions. Let's find out what we want these things to do. So for example, let's just say num1 and num2. We just want to see which one's bigger. All right. So this will test to see which number is bigger. So we're going to say if num1 is greater than num2, we can say system.out.println num1 is larger. Pretty simple. And then if we want, we could say else. We can do our system.out.println. We can say num2 is larger. Again, a real quick and easy way to differentiate this. And again, this else comes in really handy because if we didn't have this else part, we would say, well, num1 is larger, but we wouldn't know necessarily how that relates with num2. Even though we could imply it, this makes it a lot more explicit. We get, of course, a very explicit way for us to test this. Now, if we want to, let's say, test to see if a number is positive, or maybe if a number is, let's say, negative or anything like that, let's go ahead and set one of those up. So let's do this now with the user input number. So of course here I have user num1 is kb.xint. So let's use that one. So we say if user num1, and let's just say we want to see if it is a positive number. So let's just add a quick comment in here. Test to see if the number is positive. All right, if user num1 is going to be, well, if it's positive, it has to be greater than 0. All right, so if it is greater than 0, we're just going to say system.out.println. And we can say user num1 is positive. All right, awesome. And of course, if we add an else statement in here, we can easily clarify this a little further because one of the things we can recognize, well, if it's positive, well, it could be negative or it could be 0. So we could say user num1 is either negative or 0. All right. And what if we want to go a little bit further? What if we want to bring in, let's say, one of these string ones? How can we do something with a string? Because we have some great ones here. If we say, for example, like if input, and I use dot, and you can see we have a whole bunch of different options that start popping up here. So these are all methods of this. And there's a whole bunch of different ways of things that we can do with this. So for example, we could set a test if we want a string to be a certain length, if we want to trim it, if we want to do all these different things. But of course, the most common one we're going to see is going to be equals. And so, or equals ignore case. So let's just say if equals, and let's just go ahead and say if it equals a certain word. So let's just say we want to see if it is the word about tech. Something real quick and easy and simple. And we'll just do a curly bracket and we'll just say system.out.println. And let's just say something kind of silly like we think of similar minds. All right, something just kind of silly there. And now let's just do an else statement just to clarify if they don't type that word. And we can just do, again, a system.out.println and say something like, we are not the same. All right. Now, what if we wanted to have it affect our values? And that's, of course, something we explored a little bit last time. So I'm going to come back here for a little bit. And let's just say if, let's just say num1 is less than user num1. What do we want it to do here? All right. So let me add a quick comment here. This is testing for if two strings are equal. And this one is going to be, let's have this updates the value of, let's have it change num1 if let's say if, let's see, we say if it's less than user num1. All right. So if it is less than user num1, we'll say like num1 is equal to num1 plus user num2. All right, and all that's going to do is update it. And if they're not, we'll say else. And of course, we could just have just an if here, and that would probably work. But we could say else. What do we want to do otherwise? All right, we could make it do something else. So if num1 is greater than this, we could say something like num1 equals num1 minus user num1. And that should, of course, decrease that. So just a quick test here. Again, this would technically satisfy this condition here, but this was just, again, give some more experience with using if and using else. And we, of course, can add more things in here. So, for example, I could easily come in here and say like num2 is equal to num2 plus num1. All right, and I could add that in there, and again, it's not going to affect anything. And I could even add a system.out.println in here as well, because I can have, again, multiple lines of things in here. So let's just print out num1, and that's only going to happen if this is true. Now, of course, we're getting quite a long program here. All right, so let's go ahead and just run this and see what we actually get. So we're going to run. Now, it should prompt us to enter in two numbers. So let's go ahead and enter in 4, and let's do 5. Okay. We get num2 is larger, so you can see that is going to be this else statement right here. So we went and test this first here. Num1 was not greater than num2, so it went ahead and fell into the else statement. Then it tests this block right here, and we said user num1 is positive, all right, because it says is user num1 greater than 0? Well, user num1 was 4, so yes, that is works. Then we test to see if two strings are equal, all right, and we test against the word tech. However, if you look, we left it as the empty string up here. So it came back that we are not equal. So we are not the same. And then last one, we got 6 because we fell into this if block here. Now, the only thing I could do is I could come back here and test this right here because we never really quite updated input. So I could say input equals kb.nextLine, for example. And that would help clarify this. So it's just a little bit nicer. Just add a quick system here, system.out.println, enter a line of input. There we go. And so, fix that. All right. And now if we rerun it, do 4 and 5 again. All right, we still get the same output, but now we actually are getting in an input. Now notice it didn't actually give me an input here. All right, and that's because, again, this is something that happens sometimes when we do a next int, is that it doesn't actually get us that line input. So this is very important to note here. So because I'm going to do a testing here later on, I'm actually going to just grab a kb.nextLine, put it before this prompt here, and that should, of course, allow me to actually get this line of input that I want. All right, so let's run this one more time. Do 4 and 5. All right, now you can see it's waiting for me to get that line of input very well. So let me just go ahead, and this time I'll put in tech just so that way it matches. We are similar minds, and 6. All right, and again, that's just some quick if-else examples. We can keep going here. We can keep creating different expressions, different things to test. For example, if I wanted to test, let's say, if a certain number equals something. So for example, if num1, let's say mod 3 equals 0. We could say something like system.out.println, and let's just have it say the remainder is 0. All right, I'm just going to leave that there. I'm not even going to do an else statement here, just so I can test this real quick and show you. And you can see enter a line of input. I'll put tech again. And we get the remainder 0 because, again, we've looked last time we had 6. 6 divided by 3, 2 with a remainder of 0, which, of course, I spelled remainder wrong. Quick fix there. And that is, again, we don't necessarily need a else statement all the time because, again, this just checks for remainder. We don't necessarily need to have it be something else unless we want it to. be something else. So again, some quick ways to kind of test using if-else, and hopefully that gives us a nice, good fundamental understanding of how to use some of these different expressions, because we're going to get to be using these quite a bit as we move forward.